There are moments in human history when the sky opens its veil, not to reveal transcendental beauty, but to warn with absolute urgency those who have ears to hear. One of these crucial moments transpired in the heart of the Vatican on an autumn morning that seemed common and ordinary in the year 1884. Pope Leo XIII had just concluded the solemn celebration of the Holy Mass, the one he himself had presided over with profound devotion and complete reverence. He remained in silent and contemplative thanksgiving, his head bowed reverently before the divine altar, surrendered to intimate communion with the Creator, when suddenly something extraordinary and disturbing occurred. Those who were near him, his assistants and deacons who served him, witnessed the pontiff's face undergo a radical and instantaneous transformation. Its color changed drastically, as if all life had been drained from his features. His eyes, which moments before reflected contemplative peace, fixed intensely on something that no other person could see in that sacred space. The silence became oppressive. The Pope remained motionless for a few seconds that seemed like an eternity, as if observing a cosmic battle that no living human being should witness. His expression revealed horror, stupefaction, and a profound understanding of that which only he could see. Then, without uttering a word of explanation, he rose abruptly and walked with resolute determination toward his private study, leaving everyone around him in a state of confusion and unease. Half an hour later, when they finally summoned him again, he seemed profoundly transformed by the experience. He summoned his private secretary, handed him a piece of paper with a carefully written document, and uttered words that would reverberate through the centuries to come. "Print this. Distribute it to every bishop in the entire world. This prayer must be recited by priests everywhere." On that paper was written one of the most powerful prayers in all of ecclesiastical history, the prayer to Saint Michael the Archangel, Prince of the heavenly hosts, he who commands God's armies against the forces of evil. What did Pope Leo XIII glimpse in that disturbing experience that left him so transformed? He never described it publicly in specific and complete detail, maintaining the mystery with appropriate discretion. However, those closest to him, who shared his most intimate secrets during those critical years, unequivocally testified that Leo XIII had been granted an opening, a window into the invisible war that constantly and incessantly unfolds around the Church of Christ. According to the documented testimony of Monsignor Rinaldo Anelli, the Pope's private secretary during those transformative years, Leo XIII clearly saw the spirits of darkness gathering menacingly over Rome, the city that God had chosen as the seat of his church. He did not hear with ordinary human ears, but in the deepest, most hidden recesses of his soul, he perceived the mocking voice of Satan challenging God himself with blasphemous arrogance and absolute defiance. "If you grant me more freedom and autonomy," the demon said with a defiance that echoed through the invisible dimensions, "I will completely destroy your church. I will transform your most devoted children into enemies. I will corrupt your ministers from within. I will sow confusion, doubt, and disbelief in the hearts that should be closest to you." And God's answer came with indescribable majesty, with absolute authority that admits no questioning. "You have the time you ask for. Do as you please, but know that my grace will always be sufficient for those who remain faithful." The Pope watched as countless legions of demons descended upon the eternal city in coordinated and terrifying movements. Spirits of unbridled pride and arrogance, of profound and systematic moral corruption, of disbelief and rebellion against God. Powers that work to lead men astray from the path of truth. And upon them, shining like a sword of purifying and divine fire, descended Saint Michael the Archangel, Prince of the heavenly court, he who leads the armies of the Lord. It was this apocalyptic and cosmic vision, this direct dialogue between heaven and hell, between redeeming grace and destructive darkness, that impelled the Pope to compose the prayer still known and recited in contemporary times. Saint Michael the Archangel, defend us in battle. Be our protection against the wickedness and snares of the devil. May God rebuke him, we humbly pray. And you, O Prince of the heavenly court, by the power of God, cast into hell Satan and all the evil spirits who roam the world seeking the ruin of souls. To truly understand the depth of this terrifying vision and its implications, it is essential to recall exactly what the state of the world was during the time Leo III lived and reigned. The 19th century had declared open war on God and his teachings. The Protestant Reformation had shattered the unity of Christendom that had endured for centuries, creating deep divisions among Christians. The French Revolution had enthroned the goddess of reason and spilled the innocent blood of priests in the streets in systematic and terrible massacres. Thousands of religious figures had been martyred for their fidelity to the faith. And now in Rome, in the very heart and center of the Catholic Church, the Masonic Kingdom of Unified Italy had invaded the historic papal territories, seized the Quirinal Palace, which had been the residence of the popes, and publicly proclaimed the Pope a prisoner in his own city. It was an unprecedented humiliation, a clear demonstration that secular powers had decided to corner and neutralize the spiritual influence of the Church. But Leo III saw much deeper than mere earthly politics and territorial conflicts. He perceived the shadow that lay behind those political events, the ancient and malevolent intelligence that moved men to rebel against heaven. He clearly recognized in the philosophies of naturalism and relativism the ancient whisper of the primordial serpent that had tempted Adam and Eve. "You will be like gods, knowing good and evil." The new political and intellectual powers promised absolute freedom, unlimited progress, and rational enlightenment to seduced and deceived peoples. But what they truly offered was a world without divine grace, without the transforming presence of the Holy Spirit, a civilization built on unchecked human pride instead of revealed and immutable truth. The Pope understood with prophetic clarity that the battle was no longer fought with swords and spears on the battlefield, but with sophisticated and deceptive ideas, with laws that systematically distanced God from public and private life, with the gradual and planned corruption of faith in minds and hearts. However, the story did not begin with Leo XIII at that moment of extraordinary vision. 25 years earlier, Pope Pius IX had already clearly recognized the rise of spiritual darkness that threatened the Church. In 1859, he had ordered priests in the Papal States to recite a structured series of prayers after each private Mass they celebrated. 3 devout Hail Marys, the Salve Regina invoking Mary's protection, and 4 other prayers imploring God's protection, his generous forgiveness, and his lasting peace. These were the prayers after Mass, structured as a potent spiritual weapon against the rising tide of secularism that threatened to consume the Catholic faith. When Leo XIII succeeded him in the supreme pontificate, he decided to simplify and expand this practice in a truly universal way, accessible to all. In 1884, he replaced the 4 prayers of Pius IX with a single, shorter, and more concise prayer, while retaining the traditional Hail Marys and the Salve Regina that tradition had preserved. His aim was to make these supplications truly universal, uniting the faithful of the whole world in a single collective voice of intercession. The tone of this new prayer was gentler, more contemplative and meditative, asking God for help in the difficulties and hardships of the times in which they lived. It was a pastoral and compassionate approach. However, 2 years later, everything was radically transformed by the mystical experience that the Pope underwent. After the vision that left him pale and trembling, that deeply shook his soul and spiritual understanding, Leo XIII revised the decree once more with renewed urgency. The Pope, who had written a serene invocation, now added something infinitely more militant and direct, a commanding appeal to Saint Michael the Archangel, ordering every priest throughout the world to invoke the celestial warrior against the legions of hell that worked to destroy the faith. From that day forward, the words, "Saint Michael the Archangel, defend us in battle," became the rallying cry of a church under spiritual siege, the signal that the faithful understood they were engaged in an invisible war. And Leo XIII's pastoral and spiritual concern did not end there, far from it. In 1890, 6 years after his transformative vision, he composed a new and solemn exorcism against Satan and the apostate angels who had rebelled against God in primordial times. This was not for individuals possessed by the devil in particular, but was intended to be prayed by the entire church, by the bishops and priests of the world. It had universal scope and cosmic purpose. It was intended to be prayed by bishops and priests when the powers of darkness seemed to be dangerously gaining ground, when darkness seemed to be conquering lives and souls. The exorcism described with theological precision Lucifer's rebellion against God, his expulsion from heaven, and the ongoing war that has been unfolding against the Church on earth since that primordial moment. It even included a prophetic line that would echo through the centuries to come. Where the seat of the most blessed Peter and the chair of truth were established to enlighten the nations, there they planted the throne of their abomination, so that, striking the shepherd, they might scatter the flock. Those words were not merely symbolic or poetic in nature. They referred concretely to the new secular regime in Italy, whose rulers, many openly Masonic in their secret affiliations, had occupied the former papal palace, the Quirinal, and transformed it into the seat of a government hostile to the teachings of the Church. Leo XIII clearly understood that spiritual warfare had taken on a visible human and institutional form. Freemasonry, with its promises of rational enlightenment, universal brotherhood, and material progress, had clearly become the political mask of the ancient enemy. The Pope described it in his encyclical Humanum Genus as a movement deeply determined to destroy from its foundations all religious and civil discipline that sprang from Christian institutions. For him, the invasion of Rome was not merely an ordinary temporal military conquest, but the visible, palpable, and concrete sign of an invisible rebellion of cosmically significant proportions affecting all of creation. And yet, even in the face of such oppressive spiritual darkness, Leo XIII did not succumb to despair or paralyzing hopelessness. He carried the exorcism prayer in his pocket constantly, like a soldier carries his most trusted weapon. He often recited it while walking through the Vatican gardens in solitary and profound contemplative prayer. Those who observed him discreetly said that he murmured it softly as if speaking to an invisible companion, as if in direct communion with Saint Michael and the heavenly hosts. In those hands, frail from suffering and age, the prayer became a genuine spiritual weapon, a sword of faith raised against the invisible powers that hover in the air.